This police canine dog overcame his own limits to save lives in snowstorm rescue. When an avalanche traps a rescue team in a deadly storm, Blaze, a courageous canine, and his handler, Officer Rachel Simmons, are the only hope. As the temperature drops and the storm intensifies, they race against time to find missing climbers buried in the snow. With Blaze injured and the team on the brink of collapse, Rachel must make a life or death decision that could cost them everything. Will they survive, or will the storm claim them all? Blaze's paws sunk into the thick snow, leaving behind deep impressions in the frozen ground. His fur, a glossy black and brown mix, shimmered against the white backdrop as he trotted forward, his eyes scanning the mountain with fierce determination. His handler, Officer Rachel Simmons, was right behind him, her breath visible in the freezing air. She adjusted her snow goggles, squinting against the thick, swirling snowstorm. Blaze, a highly trained German shepherd, was more than just a companion. He was a vital part of the elite rescue unit stationed in the small mountain town of Silver Peak. Rachel had been his partner for 3 years, and together they had faced countless dangers. But this mission felt different. The stakes were higher. They had received an urgent distress call earlier that day. A group of climbers had gone missing after a massive avalanche struck the mountain range. Now, Rachel and Blaze were part of a team that had been sent to find them. The mountain was ruthless, with the cold biting into everything in its path, and the wind howling with the strength of 100 storms. Time was running out. Rachel's radio crackled in her ear. "Team, we're moving out. We'll divide into 2 groups. Rachel, you and Blaze will take the northern slope. The rest of us will cover the southern side. We'll stay in touch. Stay sharp." Her commanding officer's voice was steady, but Rachel could hear the unease in the background. Every minute that passed, the chances of finding the climbers alive grew smaller. She adjusted her pack, ensuring she had everything she needed before starting forward. Blaze was already ahead, his nose to the snow, sniffing the cold air for any scent of the missing climbers. Blaze's nose twitched, and he paused. Rachel watched as he slowly lowered his body to the ground, his eyes focused on a spot ahead. She quickly followed his lead, pulling her walkie-talkie from her jacket pocket. "Base, we're starting our search on the northern slope. Blaze is tracking something." The static from the radio was the only reply, a brief interruption before the line went quiet. She frowned. "Base, come in. Do you copy?" But there was nothing. She tapped the radio again, frustration creeping in. The weather conditions were making communication difficult, but the radio was critical. If they lost contact with the base, they would be completely on their own. "Stay focused, Blaze," she muttered under her breath. The dog's sharp hearing picked up the command, and he lifted his head, as if to assure her he was ready for whatever lay ahead. Blaze's movements were precise as he followed the scent trail, weaving through the deep snow. The wind picked up, blasting Rachel's face with stinging ice particles, but she barely felt it. Her focus was entirely on Blaze, who was guiding them through the storm. The mountain felt endless, its vastness swallowing them whole. Every direction seemed the same, a blur of white and gray. But Blaze was relentless. His nose found the scent again, pulling him forward. Rachel adjusted her gear once more, checking the temperature gauge on her wrist. It was dropping fast, and the cold was starting to take its toll. Her fingers were stiff, but she didn't stop. Blaze was on the move again, and she was right behind him. Hours passed, and the storm didn't let up. The heavy snow made the climb even more difficult, slowing their pace. The team's progress was hampered by the biting cold, and exhaustion was beginning to set in. Rachel's mind was focused, though, her eyes never leaving Blaze. She trusted him more than anything else. If anyone could track down the climbers, it was him. Then, suddenly, Blaze stopped. He lifted his head, and his ears twitched. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she approached him, her boots crunching in the deep snow. "What is it, Blaze?" she asked, her voice low. Blaze turned his head toward her, his expression intense. Then, he slowly trotted a few steps forward, his nose to the ground once more. Rachel followed, but this time, there was a new urgency in Blaze's movements. They had found something. In the snow ahead, there were signs of a struggle. Skid marks, patches of broken ice, and a few scattered pieces of equipment. It was all they had to go on, and Rachel's stomach tightened. If the climbers were here, they hadn't made it far. She crouched down, inspecting the markings in the snow. "This is it," she murmured. They were here. Blaze let out a quiet growl, his gaze fixed on the trail ahead. It was clear that the climbers had tried to escape the avalanche's path, but the storm had thrown their efforts into chaos. The wind howled louder, and Rachel felt a sense of isolation creep in. They were so far from the base now, and the storm was relentless. It would be a miracle if they found anyone alive. Then, as if in answer to her silent worry, the radio crackled back to life. "Rachel, do you copy?" The voice was faint but unmistakable. "Base, finally. We're on the northern slope. We've found evidence of the climbers. They're here, but no sign of life yet. Stay safe. We'll send a team to meet you. Hold your position." But just as quickly, the radio went silent again. The connection was lost. Rachel's grip tightened around the radio. They were on their own now. The storm, the cold, and the lack of communication were all against them. But Rachel wasn't about to give up. She stood up, looked at Blaze, and said the only thing that mattered now. "Let's keep moving." Blaze's ears perked, and without hesitation, he began his trek once more, with Rachel following close behind. The climb was far from over, and neither of them were about to back down. The storm raged on, swirling around them, obscuring the world in a haze of white. Visibility had dropped to almost nothing. Rachel had to squint to see Blaze's outline through the snow and wind, but she trusted him completely. They had trained for this. They had to keep pushing forward. Blaze's nose twitched. He stopped, lifting his head toward the wind, his sharp senses tuning in to something faint yet undeniable. Rachel approached, her boots sinking deeper into the snow as she reached for her radio, hoping for a clearer connection. "Base, do you copy?" There was no response, just the crackling of static. Rachel's jaw set in frustration. She checked her watch. The time was slipping away. Every minute they spent searching for the missing climbers was one less minute they had to save them. The storm was getting worse by the second, and she knew they couldn't afford to waste any more time. "Blaze, find it," she whispered. Blaze immediately resumed his search, nose to the ground, pushing forward through the storm. Rachel followed, her breath coming in short, visible bursts. The cold was unbearable, and the wind felt like needles against her skin, but she refused to stop. The snow beneath their feet was deep and heavy, making every step a struggle. Blaze was relentless, his paws pounding against the earth, creating a rhythm Rachel could rely on. Hours passed as they pushed deeper into the mountain, following the faint scent Blaze had picked up. Then, without warning, Blaze halted again, this time looking back at Rachel with urgency in his eyes. He barked once, his ears flat, signaling that he had found something. Rachel hurried forward, and just a few feet ahead, she spotted the first sign of life. A climber's glove, half buried in the snow, a faint trail leading away from it. "We're close," Rachel muttered. She dropped to her knees, reaching for the glove and brushing the snow away. Her heart raced as she realized the glove was fresh, not more than a few hours old. Someone was nearby. Blaze was already on the move, his nose picking up the trail again. Rachel called for the team on her radio, but once again, there was no response. She cursed under her breath, but didn't let it stop her. The storm was too loud, too fierce. The snow was thick, and the freezing wind made every second feel like an eternity. The team had split up earlier, and now Rachel felt the weight of that decision. She glanced around, the horizon lost in a whiteout of snow and wind. She couldn't see anyone else, no other team members, no other climbers. Only Blaze, who was focused, determined, as always. Blaze continued his search, and Rachel followed. The hours dragged on, but they didn't stop. Not for food, not for rest. They pressed on. The scent trail grew stronger, but so did the storm. Rachel could feel her body aching, her movements slower with each step. Yet, she refused to slow down. She looked down at Blaze, who was moving through the snow with incredible precision. His training was second to none, and she trusted him completely. But the conditions were making it harder and harder to stay on course. The wind was ferocious now, the temperature plummeting, the snow blinding. They needed to find shelter soon. They needed to find the climbers. Hours later, the team finally arrived at a makeshift campsite, one of the few landmarks that had been set up during the initial search. But as they dug into the snow, they realized it wasn't just any campsite. It was where the climbers had first been struck by the avalanche. The site was eerily silent. No signs of life. The tension was palpable. Some of the team members were exhausted, and their frustration began to boil over. They argued about whether to continue or to pull back, wait for the storm to pass. But Rachel was resolute. "We can't leave them. We keep moving," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We've come this far." A few of the other team members exchanged uneasy glances, but reluctantly followed her lead. Blaze, sensing the urgency, continued to dig at a spot buried deep in snow. His paws flung the icy earth aside with urgency, and Rachel's eyes widened as she realized they were getting closer. "Keep digging," Rachel shouted, adrenaline fueling her words. The team moved quickly, their hands numb from the cold, but driven by the thought of saving lives. After what felt like an eternity, they uncovered the first climber. Unconscious, but alive. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. It was a miracle. They'd found one. But there was no time to celebrate. Blaze's keen nose led them farther, and the storm kept coming harder. The temperature was dropping even further now, and Rachel could feel the weight of every second slipping away. Blaze moved faster, sniffing the air, following the scent with relentless focus. Then, just as they were about to reach another spot Blaze had indicated, disaster struck. The ground beneath them shifted with a deafening crack, an avalanche. The roar of snow tumbling down the mountain filled Rachel's ears as she barely managed to shout, "Move!" She grabbed Blaze's collar, trying to pull him away, but the force of the avalanche was overwhelming. Snow cascaded over them, sending them into a small ravine, trapping them in the narrow, icy passage. The team was caught. Blaze was injured, his paw caught beneath a pile of snow. Rachel's heart raced, but she didn't let go of him. She could hear the storm growing louder around them, the wind biting into her skin. The rescue was turning into a battle for survival. Rachel quickly assessed their situation. The storm's fury was unbearable, and the avalanche had made their position even more precarious. The snow continued to fall, heavy and unrelenting, piling up on their small refuge. With every passing minute, it felt as if they were sinking deeper into the mountain's grip. Blaze let out a soft whimper, his injured paw trapped under a mass of snow. Rachel crouched down, brushing the snow away with frantic urgency. She muttered soothing words to him, trying to calm both herself and the dog. His eyes met hers, filled with trust and pain. "You're going to be all right," she said softly, although even she wasn't sure how they would make it through this. But they had no choice. Time was running out. Rachel scanned the team. They were all in varying states of exhaustion, and their supplies were dangerously low. The storm had taken its toll, both physically and mentally. The wind howled, deafening, and the snow continued to fall in relentless sheets. They couldn't stay where they were. The avalanche might come again, and they wouldn't survive another one. "Everyone, listen up," Rachel called out, her voice strong despite the fear gnawing at her. "We need to move now. Blaze can still guide us. We find the climbers and get out of here, no matter what." The team nodded, their faces grim but determined. They knew the situation was dire, but Rachel had led them this far, and they would follow her. Blaze stood, his injuries slowing him down but not stopping him. He gave a low growl, indicating that he was ready to move. Rachel glanced at him, grateful for his determination. She wasn't going to give up on him, but she also couldn't afford to waste time. They set out again, moving through the deep snow. Blaze, despite the pain in his paw, led the way, his nose working tirelessly to pick up the faint scent of the missing climbers. Rachel and the others followed closely, every step a struggle in the thick snow. The cold was biting, cutting through their clothes, and the exhaustion was starting to take its toll. But there was no time to rest. As they moved further into the storm, the wind picked up again, howling through the mountain, obscuring their vision. Rachel had to squint against the stinging snow, her breath coming out in sharp bursts. Blaze moved with precision, following the trail he had picked up earlier. Then, after what felt like hours, Blaze stopped again. His ears perked up, and he froze. Rachel's heart skipped a beat as she approached him. The scent was stronger now. Blaze had found something. Blaze began digging furiously, throwing snow aside with urgency. Rachel's breath caught in her throat as she realized they were close. The team gathered around, digging as quickly as they could. Every second felt like a lifetime, and the snow was piling higher around them, threatening to trap them once again. Finally, after what felt like forever, the team uncovered the final climber. She was barely conscious, her lips blue from the cold. Her shallow breaths were labored, and it was clear that she wouldn't last much longer in the storm. Rachel quickly took the climber's pulse, relieved to find a faint heartbeat. She turned to the team, her voice shaking but determined. "We need to move. Now." Blaze, despite his injury, stood tall. Rachel could see the exhaustion in his eyes, but he was still focused, still determined. He had led them this far, and now, he was their only hope of getting out of the mountain alive. The storm was at its peak now, the snowdrifts reaching life-threatening levels. The temperature had dropped even further, and the wind was howling so loud that it was hard to hear anything else. The team's faces were covered in snow, their bodies numb with cold, but they kept moving. Rachel made a heart-wrenching decision. They couldn't wait any longer for the storm to pass. It was now or never. She would have to trust Blaze's instincts to lead them out of this. She'd seen the dog pull through the most impossible situations, and now she had to believe in him one last time. "Blaze," she said, her voice low but filled with confidence. "We're trusting you. Lead us to safety." Blaze's ears twitched, and he gave a soft bark, as if acknowledging her command. With one last glance at Rachel, he turned and began to move forward, his nose to the ground, guiding them through the thick snow. The team followed, every step a struggle, the snow and wind pushing back against them with every movement. The ground beneath them was unstable, and Rachel could feel the danger at every turn. The avalanche had already torn through this part of the mountain, and there was no telling when another one would come. Every moment was a fight for survival. The storm showed no mercy. The snow kept falling, blinding them, and the mountains seemed to shift beneath their feet. But Blaze, despite his injury, pressed on, his senses guiding him through the chaos. As they neared a narrow ridge, the snow began to lighten, the wind subsiding just enough for Rachel to see a break in the storm ahead. It was their only chance, the escape route. But there was no time to lose. Blaze gave one last burst of energy, his legs moving with a final, determined push. The team followed, pushing through the snow as the storm finally began to clear. They reached the ridge just as the snowdrifts began to settle, and the storm's rage seemed to wane. But then, Blaze collapsed. Rachel rushed to his side, her heart stopping as she saw the exhaustion in his eyes. He had pushed himself beyond his limits. But, against all odds, they had made it out. As the storm cleared and the sun began to break through the clouds, Rachel stood beside Blaze, watching as the rescue team arrived. The survivors would make it, and Blaze's heroism would never be forgotten. Rachel looked down at him, a bond forged in the fires of survival and trust. Together, they had faced the storm, and together, they would face whatever challenges came next.